In this part of the training on modelling, I asked you to think about the need to know curriculum. And in the need to know curriculum, you chunk up learning for the student and deliver it at the right time, according to when that learning would be assessed. And this, I think, is not the ideal form of curriculum. So there were 10 questions that I set here that you could use in order to decide whether the model that you were giving your students was good enough to accelerate their learning. So firstly, does it allow them to get full marks? Then have you been explicit about how to do this? How exactly can they get 100%? How do the students see the big picture? Do they get the whole answer first? In my experience, this is incredibly rare. What we do is teach students the building blocks, and once all the building blocks are assembled, then the whole answer is revealed. But actually, if we present them with the whole answer first, they will learn at different rates that we can't predict. The whole class can move at the rate that we determine, but each individual in the class could learn at much different and accelerated rates if we gave them the whole answer at the beginning. How do your students transfer the skills of one answer to another? And that's something that you really do need to make explicit in your modelling. How can students learn from the model more than you specifically teach them? So, for example, if your model answer is annotated for skills, then they will dip into that according to their level of need, or at least there is a greater chance that they will do so. What's the earliest your students could understand these skills? It's really useful to look at the mark scheme and questions from a different subject, because you will approach these with an open mind. When you do that, for example, if you're old enough to have invigilated GCSE exams, you'll probably remember looking at the questions and thinking, Christ, I could do these. I haven't studied this subject in 20 years, and yet the answers seem easy to me. That, to me, is a universal experience that we have when we look at other subjects' GCSEs. Of course, when we look at our own, that isn't the case, and the reason for that, I think, is that we're teaching a need-to-know curriculum. We're just giving the students these little building blocks, and as soon as they miss one building block, they have a difficulty. And if they miss 2 or 3 building blocks, then they can never get the A star and probably never the A. Consequently, we're producing students who can't get A's and A stars in our subjects because of the way we teach. We assume, of course, that's because our subject is inherently difficult. But of course, if we look at every other subject and look at their exam papers and think, actually this is easy, or relatively easy, then it must follow that our own is also relatively easy. We just can't see it because it doesn't correspond with our experience. But I'm suggesting our experience is a problem of our own making. It's because we're teaching the need-to-know curriculum. We're chunking everything up, and we're not letting students see the whole answer. We're not giving them the big picture often enough. So they can only progress at the speed that we progress with them. They can never get ahead of us. And so how can students learn from a model that you give them and get ahead of what you're actually teaching them in class? What's the earliest your students could understand these skills? So you're teaching GCSE skills, but are you starting them in year 10, or actually could they be learnt in year 8 or even year 7? Another way of evaluating that is thinking, well, what would happen if there were no GCSE exams? And so I wasn't going to assess their learning in year 11 here, but I just wanted them to be brilliant in my subject. What would happen then? What age group would you teach that skill or that subject content to them? So let's say you decided, well, actually, I'd like to teach that in year 7. What are the barriers to doing that? How would you break those down? Is it a head of department? Is it the fact that you bought certain textbooks that arrange the curriculum in this way? Is it the fact that you would have to redo the curriculum? Some of these obstacles will not be insurmountable. So how do you get around those obstacles? And if they are real, can you get around them at least for your more able students? In this part of the training, therefore, I asked you to look at questions from other subjects so that you could coach the teacher of another subject through the mark scheme, through the question, to get them to try and find a way to teach that skill as early as is possible. And that's determined by when the learners are ready for it. And then I want to show you some data on expectations, because it's our expectations of how students learn that determines when we teach something. And if we're teaching something too late, it's because our expectations are wrong. So we're going to look at some data from other schools and some national data to work out when it is that we should teach things in order to become a brilliant school. The data system that we use in school is CCS, and I'm going to show you a way to use that to ask the question, how can we use the data that we have in school in order to model more effectively? And then finally, I'm going to look at the idea of revision. Another way of saying this is, how can we get the students to learn more without us as teachers always having to do more? And there's a real danger that in any training, a senior leadership team are asking the staff to do more, and I don't think that's the right way to go about things. I think we ought to just do better, but not to spend extra time doing it. So let's look at this astonishing piece of research. The need to learn curriculum is the idea that we teach children what they need to know at the right time. So we ignore when the exam is. We're not preparing them for an exam that's taken in Year 11. We're actually just preparing them for brilliance in our subject, and they just happen to take an exam in Year 11. And this idea of acceleration, teaching things more quickly, gives us an incredible value added, a D of 0.88. You remember that the average is D of 0.4, and this was ranked by Hattie in visible learning as 5th out of 137 possible interventions. In other words, is incredibly powerful to accelerate your students. And this doesn't just mean entering them from an exam early, it means giving them a new curriculum, a different curriculum that moves them through your subject more quickly. So in order to explore this, I looked at Balcarass School, which is a Gloucestershire school like Chipping Campden is, and I've included this in the video because none of this information is privileged or private. It's all in the public domain. I've taken it straight out of the performance league tables that are available to anyone with a computer and an internet. So this is Balcarass. Their high attainers in English and Maths, 90 and 97%, compared to ours of 91 and 94. Not really significantly different. But it's with their middle attainers, these are the students who arrive on a level 4, that they score really highly. Over 90% of their middle attainers making expected progress, compared to Chipping Campden, where you have an average of about 76%. Now that's a big difference, especially when you consider that in both schools, this middle attainers group, the level 4 group, is probably the largest group, or at least as large as the high attainers. So schools that do better than us, and Balcarass of course is first in Gloucestershire for this kind of progress, do so with the middle learners, not so with the low attainers. So we're much more successful with low attainers than Balcarass, dramatically so, but because in both schools students entering on level 3 are probably only averaging about 10% of our cohort, it doesn't make a significant difference to the overall results. So how does a school like Balcarass get much better results from their middle learners? Well, one explanation could be they simply have much better teachers. But that can't be true because our teachers are getting very similar results from the high attainers, and so their ability as teachers not in question. They must be just as good as the teachers in Balcarass. What must be the difference? Well, I'd like to posit this idea. In Balcarass, they have higher expectations of the average student than we do. And it's the expectations and the way that we don't accelerate our middle pupils through at the same rate as they do in Balcarass that results in our students not making as dramatic progress. You can see that our students make very good progress here, but if we're looking to improve, then this is the level that we should be aiming at. And I think teacher expectation can be influenced by the climate of the school that you're in. So I've included here some selective schools in Gloucestershire. So here we have Marling School, which is virtually a grammar school. It's selective, and it's got an outstanding in its Ofsted report. But the students who entered in level 5 only average a B+ in that school. I say only because in our school they average an A-. But something interesting happens. We've already seen how they were averaging an A- in Balcarass. That's what those figures suggested. But I've then taken the 7th best school in the country, St John the Baptist Comprehensive in Woking, and their top ability students also only get an A-. And in another school local to us, Ulster Grammar, they get an A. They're only slightly better. So if we're doing so fantastically well with the more able, so that we're in line with the 7th best school in the country, what is it that makes John the Baptist a better school in terms of progress? Well, it's this. It's these students who are entering on level 4 are achieving dramatically higher grades. That can't happen because their teaching is better, otherwise these would be different. It's happening because their expectations are higher. And similarly here, students entering in level 3 are doing phenomenally better. Again, that might only be 10 students per school, but I think it shows us how much higher expectations are for middle ability students there. And I think that's where schools across the country can improve. It's in their expectations, and particularly this middle ability cohort. Now you'll see that in the grammar schools, the middle ability cohorts do well, but actually that's probably again only about 10 students. These are students who have very high IQs and have just done not so well in the SAT tests. Now incidentally, lots of teachers complain about the SAT tests not being reliable indicators, but these exam results from grammar schools suggest that's not so. These students probably did really well in their 11+, but the Key Stage 2 tests have predicted, because they didn't get level 5s in all of them, that these students are not best at studying, at making the most of their intelligence. So kids entering on level 4 still do worse in a grammar school, even though they're just as intelligent as those on a level 5. Then finally, I included Pates Grammar School to see what the highest expectations would look like, because they get an A* on average, an A* minus for all their entrants. Although there is a difficulty in interpreting this, because the best students in Gloucestershire tend to go to Pates Grammar School as opposed to the other local grammar schools that they could get into. And this is why there are no students in Pates who entered at level 4. Okay, well, what else can the data tell us about expectations? Well, the research constantly refers to within school variation. In other words, the progress you would get with one teacher compared to another. And the research says something very surprising. It says that the variation between teachers in a school is much greater than the variation between schools themselves. So I went to the league tables and found the school that had the lowest progress in Gloucestershire. So again, this isn't to victimise the school, it's simply available in the league tables, and I needed the school with the lowest progress in order to compare it to the progress at our school. So Gloucester Academy in 2013 had this progress for English and this level of progress for maths. And when you look at that in Chipping Campden, you can see that there's a very close difference of 40% between the two schools. So the research predicts that at Chipping Campden School there will be greater than a 40% difference in progress between classes, and if we could reduce that difference, we would dramatically improve our school results. Well, I found it very difficult to find a fair way of doing this. One way would have just been to have taken the class with the lowest progress and compared it to the class with the highest, but that wouldn't be fair. We know from research and Family Fisher Trust predictions that students predicted A grades find it far easier to make progress than students predicted D's or C grades. So it wouldn't be appropriate to set the progress of a bottom set against a top set. Instead, I just picked a top set, and I picked K1 because K1 is filled with the best scientists and mathematicians usually, and so any class that comes from K1 is likely to be filled with similar students of similar ability within the top set range. And what I found was fascinating. So in the top class in K1 in the school, students 3 levels of progress were 113% of the prediction. In other words, they completely outperformed the 3 levels of progress, and they were 791% higher than the 4 levels of progress. So only 6% were predicted 4 levels of progress, and 47% got it. None were predicted 5 levels, and nearly 7% got it. When I compared this to the lowest performing K1 group, we found that 78 or 79% made 3 levels of progress, which isn't an atrocious figure. It's below target, it's not atrocious, but it's a massive 34% below what this other class was achieving, very close to the 40% difference between Gloucester Academy and our own. But then when we look at the 4 levels of progress, which of course a top set, many of them should be getting, we can see that the target here was 60%, and they got only 34%. And the difference, therefore, between this figure and this one is over 700%. You can see how dramatically the influence of one teacher has been over another. And that difference has to be about the teacher's expectations. Now, the reason I've included this is Hattie's 11th commandment, know thy impact. If you've not been on CCS and looked at the results of your class, and if you've not been on CCS and looked at the results of other teachers teaching a similar class, you've no idea how well your students have done compared to how they could have done. If you're not in charge of the data of your class, you're not really aware of how effective your teaching is. And so my number one message, whatever system you have in your school for examining results, is look at the value added for your class, compare it to other teachers teaching similar kids, and work out what it is that they're doing that you're not, or what it is you're doing that they're not that you could share with them. And if we can get this right in schools, if teachers take responsibility for working out what they're doing brilliantly and what they need to improve on, everybody will get better. And I'm including that here in my video about modelling because it's about modelling your expectations. And if you raise those expectations, you start to accelerate students and they perform brilliantly. You don't have to become a better teacher to do that. You just have to change the way you think about your students' progress. So what is the difference between high and low performing teachers? Well, it isn't classroom management actually in their behaviour. You'll see many teachers with excellent classroom management who have indifferent progress in their classes. Have a look at the data, you'll find that's true. It isn't how hard we work. I'm very lucky to work at Chipping Campden School. It's very difficult to find a teacher who is not working hard enough. You simply don't look around the staff room and see slackers. We could probably each pick maybe one name or two, and in my experience that's incredibly rare. In fact, it is the best school I've ever taught in for the level of work that teachers do. But that isn't what's making the difference between high and low performing. It also isn't experience. If you look at the results of classes and compare it to whether teachers have gone through the upper pay spine, for example, you'll find that there isn't a correlation necessarily between experience and excellent progress. It's this, according to Hattie, it's the expectations when they, or we, decide what to teach and at what level of difficulty and their understanding of progress. And the key here is expectations. If you want your students to do better, you have to start expecting more of them. Not doing more teaching, not working harder, just expecting more from your teaching. And a fundamental way of doing that is finding out the teachers who are doing what you're doing, but better. And find out what it is they do. Because none of it will be rocket science, and all of it will be ideas that you can steal and replicate. And that definition from Hattie is what I call the need to learn curriculum. We give students what they need to learn in order for them to master difficulty and in order for them to progress. So change from a curriculum that might be need to know, delivered in bite-sized chunks, to one that shows the whole picture and accelerates students through it. So if this has been helpful, please like the video and refer it to somebody. If not, good luck with the next one.